Welcome, everyone. Welcome to API Days 2024. Our topic today is machine learning-driven API standardization, boosting efficiency and developer experience. Let's start with some introductions. My name is Bharath Bhushan Sreeravindra, and I'm part of the API Enterprise platform within Capital One.
Hi, I'm Anoop Gupta. I'm also from API Platform, managing API Gateway and API Security.
Let's start off with the agenda for today. We'll start off with the problem statement. We will talk about the key enablers for standardization. How does standardization work in our API lifecycle management? And finally, discuss impact of standardization. At this point, I would like to hand over to Anoop to kick us off with the problem statement.
All right, so we'll set some context on the API standardization and how machine learning is enabling the use case here. With the API first approach of enterprise teams, designing and building APIs for internal and external clients has led to widespread proliferation of APIs across the enterprise. This approach supports diverse platforms, services, business needs, and there is more focus on developer experience that in turn boosts efficiency. As the number of internal and external customers grow and consume different versions of the APIs created by API producers, the whole ecosystem gets more complex. Another pillar is API governance that defines policies and processes that promotes API consistency. API governance has emerged as a discipline to manage the complexity and issues arising from proliferation. API governance is more important than ever, making sure that we are compliant, consistent, and we build secure APIs. So what is data standardization, or what is standardization in APIs? It is the process of defining and implementing consistent rules where consumers and producer codes can interact with each other effectively, staying away from bugs, so simplifies maintenance, smoother integrations across microservices, and many more benefits we will discuss later in this presentation. And what is data, or what is API data standardization? In any big enterprise with thousands of APIs and several versions, consumers and producers can easily drift from enterprise standards on, let's say, naming convention of attributes. And that's where the API's data standardization is leveraged. And again, what is the role of machine learning in data standardization? Exploring how teams can harness capabilities of machine learning models to introduce data standardization at the outset of the API lifecycle design phase. And we will dig deeper into this topic as we go further. All right. So similar to API sprawl problem, standards also proliferate. With the adoption of microservices architecture, growth of domain-driven APIs have exponentially increased. Here is a view of several internal external consumers consuming APIs. Some of the API producers are consumers themselves. So within an enterprise having thousands of APIs, interaction can get complex, and so is to understand the attributes that represent the same entity across the enterprise. So talking about how standards proliferate. So multiple APIs exposing the same customer account number attribute in different names and formats, thus making it difficult for the consumers to interpret the information. What action needs to be taken by them? Is the attribute name, is the attribute name same across the enterprise? Is the data type same? Is the field the format of the field is same, whether the field is encoded or encrypted, or it's tokenized. So it becomes, so once that is defined, it becomes easier for the consumers to consume as well. Now we have one attribute with multiple competing standards across the enterprise. I'll hand it over to my co-speaker here, BB, to talk more about the machine learning and how to harness the power of machine learning in API data standardization.
Let's start with some key enablers that are required for data standardization. Overall, there are three key enablers which are pivotal to achieving standardization: data domain, data models, and machine learning. The first two enablers are a prerequisite for the third enabler, where machine learning can help achieve standardization at scale. Let's dive a little further into each of these enablers. The first key enabler here for standardization is the data domain. A data domain defines and revolves around a central bounded subject. Data domains are themselves made up of the subject's area's concepts, context, and relationships within its boundaries, as well as explicit relationships with concepts from other domains. The domain can be further classified into subdomains based on groupings of specialized concepts. And the concepts provides fundamental themes which derive from the classes of the subdomains. Let's take an example. In the example here, account and customers are domains. Account can have subdomains such as financial account and non-financial account. And financial account in turn can have specialized concepts such as deposit and credit accounts. Some best practices to keep in mind around domains are that a domain should have a well-defined boundary and should be mutually exclusive. A domain is applicable to multiple subdomains. A concept ideally falls under a single domain, but they can have relationships to multiple domains. And finally, domains should be flexible and extensible to evolve over time. The second key enabler here is data models. Before we start modeling the data, there is a need to first establish a common language across the data ecosystem. Now, why would we need this? This is like the foundation for linking the conceptual with the physical data, which in turn enables data discovery and use. This unified understanding of data is what powers machine learning models. The common language defined here would constitute the vocabulary and the standards that apply to the vocabulary. So what are these standards? Here is just a subset or a minimal set of standards that have to be applied. We can look at label, definition, data type, security tags, and operational name. So if we take the vocabulary and the model, it is based on the standards, we refer to the result as standardized attributes. Now let's take a look at machine learning, which is like the third step in the key enabler. The very first step in this process is data collection and preparation. Identification of these attributes that needs to be standardized across various sources. This in itself could be a huge undertaking depending on the size of the organization and the amount of data that needs to be evaluated. And more importantly, making sure that incorrect data is eliminated. So as part of the preparations, once identified, they will all be mapped to standardized attributes like seen in this picture. Now, taking a look at all the list of standardized attributes and the data that needs to be standardized, these could be fed in as input to the pre-processing step here. And the pre-processing step could involve one or more chaining to transform the data, for which the final step is then applied through natural language processing to get us to the final recommendation. Continuous improvements of models are done based on user inputs to improve the accuracy of these recommendations, or the data itself might have to be updated at this point. Now, let's take a look at standardization in API lifecycle management. Here is a high-level overview of like the lifecycle of an API. It starts with planning of the API, then moving on to design, then reviewing the API. We finally develop the API, and then it goes to deployment. Now, let's take a look at where standardization comes into the picture. The creation of new APIs can now go through the new standardization process as part of the design stage itself. Now let's take a deeper dive into how this looks like. Here is an example, like, if a user is coming in and creating a new API, we would let them, the discovery and use of standardized attributes during the API design phase. We would also enable the producers to review and apply these attribute recommendations based on our models. And finally, we will also provide the ability to update API specifications dynamically with these attribute updates. Now I will hand it over to my co-speaker to talk about the impact of standardization.
Well, thanks, Phoebe. We learned about the key enablers, machine learning models, and standardization in API lifecycle management. Now let's talk about the benefits of API data standardization in developer experience, beyond APIs, API governance, and API discovery. Well, let's dig deeper into the developer experience and how it boosts efficiency. So the data standardization eliminates the manual effort on part of the producers to identify standard attributes across the enterprise. It simplifies maintenance by minimizing bugs. So developers can put appropriate validations around such attributes, simplify documentation, flattening the learning curve, maximizing collaboration by removing complexity, enabling self-service. So the API producers are able to leverage the self-service tooling to standardize the APIs that aids in building APIs at scale, promoting innovation by focusing more on the research rather doing the mundane tasks, and most importantly, time to market. By introducing data standardization early in the life cycle, we will remove the unnecessary complexity, reducing the time to review. And it's a shift left approach to productionize the APIs quickly. So let's talk about data standardization beyond APIs. So how data standardization can be leveraged beyond APIs? Like any high performance organizations depends on data to bring value to their customers. So enterprises are not just about APIs, but also about streams, data sets, and much more. So whatever fits their domain and the problem they are solving. So how easy it will be when the data attributes are standardized across all these use cases, like streams and data sets, and having the same representation. So how easy it will become to consume those APIs. So as previously mentioned by BB, we need a robust set of library where standardization attributes can be mapped to multiple attributes across various data sources. Now, API governance keeps API consistent, compliant, and secure, well managed, and most importantly, reusable. It enables enterprise to produce more value to their customers. With several internal and external APIs and the API first approach and proliferation, governance is more, it's important than ever. As API governance policies gets applied to the API lifecycle, API data standardization plays a key role. With the standardization of attributes, review process becomes efficient as you can ensure policies are applied to such attributes. Developers can mitigate risk by ensuring data governance on sensitive data exposed through these APIs. Methods like tokenization, encryption, encoding, and other policies can be applied to these attributes to make sure sensitive data is not leaked to the external customers. Now, coming to API discovery, like depending on your enterprise solution, discovery can be either done via out-of-band inspection of the API traffic through the network, or can be done through the cataloging system during the life cycle. API discovery is one of the most important aspects of the life cycle, where developers can find information of the APIs, their endpoints, functionality, schemas, domains, and versions. So how standardization attributes can help here? It is easy to identify APIs with standardized attributes so that they are easily consumable and reusable. So any cataloged APIs can be looked into the catalog by looking at some of the data attributes which are standardized. And it can also help in identifying the APIs that are marked for deprecation based on certain deprecated attributes. And there are several more benefits to the API data standardization in any big organization. And this is just one aspect of the journey here. So, well, that wraps our presentation. And thank you all for attending this presentation.